Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street partners with businesses, organisations, unions and social democratic parties across the globe to train leaders, develop community organising strategies and empower people to organise for change. And in 2021, Dunn Street will continue to work with folks that want to make a difference, inspire, give hope and enable others to achieve their shared purpose. To find out how you can partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. Socially Democratic is also presented to you by Marles Blackburn Lawyers. Would you like to work in sunny Queensland? Who wouldn't like to work in sunny Queensland and grow your leadership capability? Marles Blackburn, Australia's leading class action plaintiff law firm, is looking for an experienced office leader specialising in personal injuries law. This is a fantastic and varied role in regional Queensland, giving you the ability to mentor, coach and build a team to be the best that they can be. Support will also be provided for relocation costs to sunny Queensland. And to apply, go to morrisblackburn.com.au/careers. Be part of the change and fight for fair. Apply now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left political and cultural podcast that dives into the progressive issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And on this week's episode, we are joined by the Deputy Leader of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party and the Federal Member for Corio, Richard Marles. Richard has been on the show before, and in fact, the last time he was on the show, we kind of got off on a whole bunch of tangents, and he suggested that next time he comes on, why don't we talk about some of our favourite sporting moments that we have experienced over the years. And so today is a bit of a different episode. We're just going to really just talk about sport, which I'm pretty happy about. I could do that all the time, and I think so could Richard. So today was a bit of a fun episode, hearing from Richard and some of the experiences that he's had and some of the experiences I've had in terms of going and watching some of our favourite sports people, both here in Australia and overseas. So that'll be a bit of a lighthearted episode amongst all the doom and gloom that is the Morrison federal government and their ability to not perform the only task that we asked them to do, and that was to roll out a vaccine. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify and Stitcher. And if you're an Apple Podcast user, please leave the podcast a rating and give us a review on your iPhone or your whatever you use to listen to the podcast. And to get all the updates for the episodes, follow us at Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn. Okay. Let's get to today's episode. Okay, we're taping this one on a Friday morning in downtown Melbourne. We've had a glorious week in Melbourne, which proves that God is indeed a Victorian. And joining me on the line from his car, I think in Bendigo, which is appropriate as he's there for a sporting event for one of his kids, is the Deputy Leader of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party and the Member for Corio, Richard Marles. Welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Stephen Donnelly, how are you?
I'm very good. Now, last time you were on the show, towards the end, you threw down the challenge to me and said, next time I come back on the show, we should do a episode dedicated to our most memorable sporting moments that we have experienced. And I think that came about because we kind of got super sidetracked in the show itself for some particular reason, because you and I are both sport nuts. And in fact, after you said that, I did recall you and I happened to be flying to Sydney and shared a cab from the airport into the city. I think we were going to a Labor Party event, and I can't remember what it was, but you and I got chatting away about this very topic. And so with that in mind, we're now going to basically record that taxi ride from the city, from the airport to the city, in which we are going to list our top 5 sporting moments that we've experienced in our lifetime, from 5 down to 1. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. Now, first of all,
you're going first.
I am going first. Now, I will preface this by saying it was, and I think you'll have the same challenge for a different sport and a different club, but it was very difficult to not just list all top 5 moments of the history of the Celtic Football Club. So I had to really try and get some level of diversity in my top five. It is a little football, association football, not AFL heavy. But nonetheless, my number five is actually an AFL game.
Mm-hmm.
And it is actually not the Carlton-Geelong 1995 grand final. I've done that one out of courtesy to you. I know you probably
I was there.
Indeed. And so was
It's
I.
definitely not in my top five.
I can
I
imagine.
thought it was going to be that morning.
Yeah.
I was definitely prepping for it to be, but it wasn't.
But I've left it off because in the end, whilst it was a great experience for a Carlton supporter, it actually wasn't a very good game.
It was not.
It was.
So can I tell my memory? We're going to get sidetracked. My memory of that, I was there. James Button, who might be a good person for you to have on this podcast because he's very much socially democratic is where his head's at. But he, for a long time, wrote for the Fairfax. And he's a massive Geelong fan, and he did the most beautiful piece about being a Geelong supporter, which was a feature in The Age that morning. And I was at the ground, from about 8 a.m. I think I read that piece between about 9:30 and 10. Afterwards, I was in a mixture of, I was crying emotionally about, what that day was going to be. At the same time, punching the air, knowing this was going to be the drought breaker. And that was the peak of the day. It only went downhill from there.
I can understand where you're coming from. That was a good team you had that year. That was
we did.
You had a really good season, and I think that you played Richmond in the preliminary final, and absolutely mollicated them.
Yeah, and so we'd come in form. We had an easy run in, but it was all illusion really because Carlton lost 2 games that year. I think David Parkin said it was the best team, player-led premiership ever. And in some ways, I take some inspiration from that for Geelong this year because it was an older Carlton side where it was one last time. It was a bit like the Michael Jordan doco, I reckon, for that team. And I'm kind of hoping that's what this year is for Geelong. But they were just dominant and they smashed us. It was fantastic. Fantastic for them. Terrible for us.
Okay, so this is a very good start for us because we have not talked about much.
Okay, you go first.
All right. Okay, I'm going to cut to the chase. It's September 18, 1999. It is the morning of 2 moments for me that day. One, it is the Victorian state election.
Yes.
And 2, in that afternoon, it was the preliminary final between Carlton and Essendon.
Which you win by a point, I think.
We do.
Yeah.
It was a day of underdogs. I remember getting up at 5 a.m. and driving to Bentley to set up the booth and hand out for Rob Hudson and hand it out till lunchtime that day, not thinking that Labor had any chance under this new leadership of a guy called Steve Bracks that was lampooned by the Murdoch press as Steve Who. A very arrogant and up and about Jeff Kennett, dominant in Victorian state politics. Victorian Labor was seen as a basket case. I remember our party membership cards were made of paper and black and white, not even coloured printed paper. It was black and white and a pretty lean campaign. And I went and handed out that morning thinking, I'm just doing the right thing because we're all Labor people and that's what we do. We just front up regardless, right?
Yeah.
And said cheerio to the lovely people of the Bentley Labor Party that were handing out that day and said, I'm off to go watch a football game and probably see my football team get belted as well. So this is going to be a dark day for all involved. Not even thinking really about the election once I sort of got in the car and then drove to park near the MCG. I don't need to say much more than that because it was an incredible game of football. Before the podcast, I actually watched the highlights of the last quarter. And the backing and the back and forth, and my entire family are Essendon, and they were all at that game. They weren't sitting near me. We can't sit near each other, as we'll kill each other. I fear Essendon. It's those colours. It's Kevin Sheedy. It's always they're a fast team. They're a young team. He's a very, very unconventional coach. And we were a rubbish team. We lost 11 games that season. And we weren't meant to beat Essendon. And with, minutes to go, we're up by a point and we're just hanging on. And I remember Fraser Brown making this absolute goal-saving tackle on the 50-metre line. I can't remember, it might have been Mercedes or someone was running through. It was about to, basically kick a goal to win the game. Tackles him to the ground, spills the ball, and the ball cuts up the other end. And Justin Murphy's holding the footy as the siren went. And it was at that end of the ground that we were at. But there were some guys in front of us, Essendon fans, that were listening to 3LO, showing my age here, ABC Radio. And Tim Lane has said, 10 seconds to go. And they've all got up and left. And that's when we've realised, that's the ball game. And it was just euphoric. And I was so up and about it. I left the stadium and I ran. I was the NUS president then. I ran to Trades Hall. This is the days before mobile phones. I ran to Trades Hall to my office and got on the phone and started calling Essendon fans and abusing them. Starting with my family and then moving down the list. And when I got to the party, the election party in Williamstown, I was so up and about the football result that I couldn't comprehend what was going on in the election, and that Labor has made this incredible comeback, particularly in the regions. And, this outcome isn't done. Labor's in with a chance here. And it was hard for me mentally to compute the two highs that I was receiving here. And I remember seeing Harry Madden at the party and I said, Justin, what a day. He thought I meant the election. I meant the footy. And it was like, no, I'm not talking about, that's great. But what, and it was this kind of this, we weren't seeing eye to eye, literally, because he's 6'7". But just an incredible day.
Well, you had your priorities right. I remember that day. I think I was handing out in Lara during the day. I'd come back at lunchtime, late afternoon, and heard the result, and was thinking, well, that wasn't meant to happen because it was meant to be an Essendon North grand final. And then that night, I like you, I was certain we were going to lose. And then as the returns are coming in, it suddenly dawns on me we're about to win. And it was an incredible night. And in fact, that it then plays out over the next couple of weeks because Geelong, the seat of Geelong, ends up being the seat which tips us over. And we win by less than 20 votes or something from memory in Geelong. It was kind of incredible. But that's a good pick. It reminds me a little bit of the prelim for Geelong in '94 against North, which got us into a grand final, which we then lost. But getting there was a remarkable moment. Okay, so my number 5. So I'm going to do them a bit like you. That I'm going to do some collectively because if I did it purely on the moment, 3 of the top 5 end up being the 3 Geelong premiership. So that makes for a boring list. So I'm going to do them collectively. So the first one is the opening match of the Digicel Cup, which is a rugby league competition in PNG. And I'm going to do that collectively with an event which is cheating a little bit, but sport was really the only thing I can equate it to, which was the opening ceremony of the Festival of Pacific Arts, which was in Honiara. Both of those things took, one was in 2011, the other was in 2012. But I group them collectively because what they both were, going to a sporting event is so much about the crowd. And I think there is something about, the involuntary cheering when someone kicks a goal in footy, where at that moment, you're almost not an individual. You are literally part of a collective. You are just doing what a group of human beings are doing as one entity. And the crowd is so much what being a sports fan is about, and sort of being there. And I'd never seen crowds. As an event which was kind of, and actually particularly the Festival of Pacific Arts, it was. So to give you a sense of what that was, every country would come and do their own dance. And if you think the haka in terms of rugby union with the All Blacks, lots of the countries in the Pacific have a version of the haka, and so it was a series of those. But then a lot of the dancers were men and women. A lot of the dancers were you might describe them, I'm trying to use the right language here, but they were courting dancers. They were, you know, they were a lot of hip swaying, a lot of pelvic thrusts. And what would happen is they would go, it was on a track, it was at a sporting stadium, and they would do them sort of, we were in the main stand and they would do them for us, and we were giving a sort of a polite response. But then on the back straight, that's where the crowds were going completely nuts. And whenever the performers we'd just seen managed to get their way around there and did their version of the dance over there, the crowd went absolutely nuts. And there was a joy and a kind of like it was more than cheering. There was a kind of a high-pitched, thrill, really, that was being expressed by the crowd, which was utterly infectious. And so it was, the excitement of seeing a really good dance in front of us was partly about the expectation of what the crowd was going to be like when they saw that in the back straight. And in some ways, that first game of the Digicel Cup, which was the opening match of that season in Moresby at their main stadium, just the same. Like, there was an uncontrolled nature to the crowd, where anything could happen, like anything was going here. But it was an unbridled joy, the like of which I don't think I've really ever seen before. So for the experience of the Pacific crowds, I put both of them in as number 5.
It's a funny point you make there. Particularly when I think about rugby union and the way that the Australian rugby and New Zealand rugby are trying to work out what does Super Rugby look like at a provincial level these days, because I think the South Africans are trying to peel away from it. Why we're not engaging with Pacific Rugby? They've got a great tradition,
totally.
And pulling together a team that does represent Pacific Rugby and incorporating them into that elite competition.
Yeah, I mean that should be happening. I mean, there should be a team in the rugby union comp which should be based out of Fiji, and there should be a team in the NRL based out of Port Moresby. I mean that should happen tomorrow. You talk about kind of the like Australia's geostrategic advantage in the region. That's it. Like there is nothing. It is affinity, which is what we have, which no other country has with the Pacific. And affinity can be described in lots of ways, or there's lots of examples of it. But there is no greater affinity than the shared love we both have of those sports specifically. And in fact, they're into netball, T20 cricket. Interestingly, PNG is a ranked T20 cricket team, and Australian Test players have been involved in the coaching of that team. I mean, there's so much that could be done there, but and they love sport. I mean, they love it. They love it with the passion that you and I love it, and everyone loves it like that. And it's just like the crowds at sporting events in the Pacific are just as infectious as any crowd I've ever seen.
Fantastic. Okay, good start.
So number 4.
Number four is April 29, 2018. And the setting is Celtic Park, Glasgow, Scotland. I was heading over to Europe for work to go to and speak at a campaign and organising conference in Brussels with a whole bunch of social democrats from across Europe and North America. It also happened to coincide with Celtic needing to win one more game to secure their 7th league title. And their opponents in this particular game happened to be their long historic rivals, Rangers, also known as the Forces of Darkness and Evil. And I thought, wow, well, that would be a bit silly of me not to try to go to that game. But the itinerary was pretty tight. And basically, I managed to get myself on a flight to London the morning of the game. and then had to get a connecting flight from Heathrow to Glasgow, get my cousin to pick me up from the airport and drive me straight to the stadium in order for the game, to catch the game. And I got tickets through my cousins. The trouble was, when I landed at Heathrow, first of all, the flight was delayed out of Melbourne. Then it was delayed out of Singapore. And it was delayed. We were circling, what Heathrow's like. We were circling for about an hour. And I'm just absolutely I'm sweating it going, I'm going to miss this freaking game. We land. I come off the gate and I said, I've got a connecting flight to Glasgow. And they said, okay, this is an express thing. Just go run through there. So I do that. Get to the gate. Get on it was like the plane was sort of sitting out in the tarmac. So we all jumped on a bus and that took us out onto a bus. And we got there and there was a mechanic pulling apart the engine. And the guys, someone's told the driver of the bus, this plane doesn't look like it's going anywhere right now. And I'm just like, my face is pressed up against the window looking at this aeroplane saying, I'm so close. Anyway, they were mucking around for a bit and I'm just watching these guys and I'm just freaking out. And eventually they sort of close up the engine and look I feel like he looks to me directly and then gives me the thumbs up like, yep, this is going. And I was like, yes. Anyway, get on the plane, takes off, land in Glasgow. My cousin is waiting there for me and he literally breaks every speeding record to get me to Celtic Park. I missed probably the first 2 or 3 minutes. Get in there. It was a glorious day. The weather's never great in Glasgow. It was a beautiful day. Like the sun was shining. Yeah. And I've ran across the stadium. And I've never actually been outside Celtic Park during a game because normally you're always there beforehand. The roar coming out of that stadium was just electric and my heart's now racing. Yeah. And I get in there and I take my seat and we were up 3-0 within the first 30 minutes of the game.
You saw all the goals?
Saw all the goals.
Yeah.
Halftime. By halftime, I'm delirious. Like I don't know if it's jet lag or what, but we are absolutely humping our rivals in the game that's going to give us our title. Just absolutely humiliating for the people that we despise, that are the opposition. And then by the 53rd minute, we're now up 5-0. And I've turned to my cousin. Our record against Rangers is 7-1, and I said, this record's going to tumble today. And that record was in 1957. My dad was at that game. It doesn't fall because we sort of take the foot off the gas and just start playing kind of, tapping it around and just lampooning the whole situation, which really annoyed me. I was like, no, don't take your foot off their neck. Keep going. But it was just I was jet lagged and it took me a while, maybe a day or two later, to appreciate what I just witnessed. We've never won the league against our rivals in our home stadium. It was our 7th championship. We were going for the treble that year. And the other thing I forgot about is how loud a Celtic Rangers game is. Like there's loud in stadiums and then there's loud. This is regarded as one of the most fiercest, intensest rivalries in sport, not even just in football, but in sport. It's a kind of game that has obviously some pretty awful sectarian connotations to it as well. And you've got to be a bit careful in the moments afterwards. But just an incredible moment to experience that, and I look back on that today and go, I can't actually believe I was at that game.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Okay, well, my number 4 is also it's also football, as in soccer. So this would be the January 2012. The opening match of the African Cup of Nations between South Africa and Cote d'Ivoire. Not Cote d'Ivoire, no, Cape Verde. And it was at the stadium in Soweto, which is where they held the World Cup final. And it was, and again, this is really, this is really one for the crowd. It was, you remember that when the World Cup was in South Africa, I think it was the South African World Cup, we all were introduced to the Vuvuzela, which was and I'm not sure what the origins of it are, but it's a plastic trumpet, for want of a better description, but they are not really very musical. They just make noise. But everyone's got one. The whole, it's insane. Everyone has one, and they're all playing them. And it's pretty hard to get any sense of what the rhythm of this is. Like, do they play their quiet moments? Are there louder moments? No, they just play them. They play them for 90 minutes. That's what they do with those things, which was lucky because as it turned out, the game itself was quite boring. It was a 0-0 draw. But to be in, but it's a fantastic stadium. It's very kind of it's very important, I guess, to South Africa for this piece of infrastructure to be there in Soweto, which is really kind of the cradle of the ANC, I suppose, is how you would describe it. I mean, this is the place that Mandela comes to political prominence. As you know, and really, Johannesburg is the place of kind of so much of the politics of South Africa. So for this stadium to be there is really important. So it's pretty amazing to be there. Beautiful stadium. But the crowd. But the other wonderful thing about that crowd is I don't know if you've been to South Africa, but South Africa is it sounds very trite saying it now, but race obviously is a large part of the history, the modern history, over the last few centuries history actually of South Africa. And I guess for me, at least, in going there, it was very, I felt like all of that was very noticeable, and I think that it would be hard for it not to be given its immediate history. And none of these things are worked through overnight. The sort of you're not going to remedy apartheid, in one act. I mean, apartheid had a legal underpinning, but it was cultural as well, and that stuff takes time. But one thing, and certainly there were, there are aspects of life in South Africa where you see a racial divide in the sense of things that are done by one race more than the other. But there on that night in that crowd, it was the Rainbow Nation that Mandela was sort of dreaming of when he spoke about South Africa's future, which is really at the heart of the modern South African flag. And so it was really great to see that. But from a pure sporting point of view and a crowd point of view, a crowd that was totally alive and right up there as one of the great experiences I've had in witnessing sport.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that about your remarks about the Rainbow Nation, because I think particularly the perception from an Australian sporting viewpoint of South African sport is rugby and cricket, but the most popular sport in that country is football.
Oh, totally, it's football. And I think it would be, and so to be honest, my preconception, I guess, going in there was that it was, that I wouldn't. It was a black sport, for want of a better term, but and I think that would be a fair description of most of the members of the team. But it was not the crowd. The crowd was it was a rainbow crowd. And I think the whole nation had got behind South Africa and around its soccer team. And I think probably, this was in the aftermath of the World Cup. So I felt the World Cup was 2010. It was held in South Africa. So this is 2 years after the World Cup final. And obviously that must have had a sort of a popularising impact on the way the sport was seen across the entire South African population. And this was probably, I suspect, the biggest tournament really that was being held in South Africa post that football tournament. I mean, so it was the opening match. It was it was not. I mean, South Africa was expected to do well. I don't think Cape Verde was expected to do anything. And so the fact that they managed to draw the game was probably a great triumph for them, a disappointment for the crowd. But but it was a great thing to see. And the full stadium was magnificent.
Okay, very good. I'm moving to number 3 now in my all-time top 5, and I'm sticking with football. But I'm going to go to the 23rd of June 2006, which was the final group game that Australia was partaking in the FIFA World Cup, and it was against Croatia. It was the first time Australia had been in the World Cup since 1974. They had obviously beaten Japan 3-1 in Kaiserslautern, which was an incredibly famous game. And then I arrived for the Brazil game, tried to get tickets, but it was too expensive, even for my tastes. So we watched it in like a park somewhere. But then I headed down to Stuttgart for the final group game, which was against Croatia. And Australia needed to draw to qualify for the knockout stages of the game.
Yep, famous game.
Indeed. And I met up with some old college friends of mine who are of Croatian extraction. Their parents are Croatian. So there was some divided loyalties in their minds. I think he was wearing a Crow hat and he had an Australian Socceroos jersey on. And in fact, he was running into so many other Croatian Australians walking around going, man, I don't know what to do about this game. This is killing me. I never had a ticket. And so I was trying to scalp a ticket over the course of the 2 days I was down there, and eventually I sort of settled on one ticket. I bought it from a Croatian family who I then subsequently found out at halftime of the game it was their father's ticket, who sadly had passed away in the weeks leading up to the game. So I bought their ticket. But that meant I was in the Croatian section. I was surrounded in red and white checkered football jerseys.
Yeah.
And I've got in there and I've taken my seat and I'm wearing my bloody Socceroos jersey and standing out like, the proverbial. And Croatia score first in the second minute, Dario Serna, and then Australia gets a penalty in the 38th minute, and Craig Moore slots it away. I don't celebrate. I kind of give a quiet fist pump to myself, and that's it. Yeah. I'm showing no emotion. I'm respecting the people around me, mainly because they were 6'7", bald, and they probably would have eaten me alive for breakfast. So I was behaving as good as I could. Second half begins. Croatia hit the lead again through Niko Kovac in the 56th minute. So right now we are out. And Australia just throws everything at it. And it's tense. It's hot. I'm sweating. I'm, just getting a bit delirious. And then, of course, Harry Kewell equalises in the 79th minute with basically 10 minutes to go in the game to equalise. And I can't contain myself. And I'm now up off the seat. And some Australians, probably 3 seats down, are also jumping up. And we're trying to high five, and I'm accidentally hitting Croatian fans in the back of their head. And it was just an amazing experience. And it was an amazing experience because I'm not very jingoistic when it comes to Australian patriotism. I don't celebrate Australia Day or all that kind of stuff. But being over in Germany for that World Cup, I grew up playing football as a kid, and I got a lot of shit for it. Growing up in country Victoria, it was cricket and it was Aussie rules. And if you played soccer, there was what's his name? The late, great Johnny Ryan wrote a book about it. And you got called all sorts of derogatory terms for playing this foreign game. But being over there and just seeing, I think there was like 15,000 Australians that travelled to that World Cup, and just seeing Australians everywhere and very, very well behaved and very respectful, but having a great time was just such a great experience. And I, for the first time, felt proud to, I guess, carry my nation's colours on foreign soil. And obviously the way that the team played across the tournament was amazing. Unfortunately, lost to Italy in the knockout stages. But it just was the first time I went, this is great. I'm actually really quite proud to be Australian. And also football, going back to the point you made earlier about the rainbow colours, I've always felt that the Australian soccer team is a better reflection of who we are as a nation than most of our national sports, because it's a multicultural sport, and it's because it's the sport of the multicultural community, plus multi-generational Australians as well. It crystallised for me at that moment in Germany about, in some ways, what it means to be Australian.
Great call, that. I think that tournament and that game were profoundly important for Australia. The country. And I think multicultural Australia. I think we learnt something about what our brand of multiculturalism is and what we do well. And because it asked so many, that game was about the Croatian community, We then play in the first round of the knockout. We play against Italy, who go on to win, and we could easily have beaten them. Like we're really competitive. I mean, it makes you wonder what might have actually been.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought we were going to win the game against Italy. When they're down to 10 people, I think they one of their guys gets sent off. So for Italian Australians, again, it was what does it mean? And so there is a club in Geelong which is the North Geelong Soccer Club. As a lot of these community clubs have, they have an ethnicity that has helped establish them. And the North Geelong Football Club is been established by the Croatian community. There have 4 internationals have come out of North Geelong. Josip Skoko came out of North Geelong, but so did Joey Didaluca. Joey Didaluca played a number of games for Croatia. He was there that day. In that he was a goalkeeper, so he didn't actually go on, but he was on the sideline on that day. But he was in the stadium. I feel like Josip Skoko was there as well. So from this one community club in Geelong, and so there they were. And they're all up all night. I think early hours of the morning is when this game was played in Australian time. So there, and it is this sense of, they've got people from this club playing on both sides. They, if it wasn't Australia, they would be going nuts for Croatia and but what does it mean? And in a way, a 2-2 draw is exactly the result it should have been. And they were ecstatic. It's like that is what it should be. And the sort of the joy in the paper the next morning when they had pictures from that club of people from there about how good was that result? Like how good was the game? How good is this moment? How good was that result? And they felt proud to be they felt proud to be Croatian Australians on that day. And I think that, our thing about multiculturalism, where we do it, when we do it the best and where we do it the best in the world, unlike really any other country, is, there is a notion of what it is to be Australian is to celebrate your heritage. That celebrating what it is to be of Croatian heritage, if you are a Croatian Australian, is in fact a very Australian thing to do. To celebrate what it is to be Italian, of Italian heritage, as an Italian Australian, is a very Australian thing to do. That is what actually makes up our country. And there's not really anywhere else in the world which kind of embraces that celebration of heritage in quite the same way as being something that makes us richer as a whole. And I really think the 2006 World Cup and everything that happened around it, and about the place of football within our society, as you've described, I think was I really do think was a coming of age of Australian multiculturalism. I think it was a huge moment, for people who hadn't necessarily grown up with football, it was like everyone was just sort of relishing in it. It's a very good call. We could do a whole podcast, I reckon, on the 2006 World Cup.
Over to you.
We're getting such. So now this is another collective one. I'm a huge lover of cricket, and I think a unique experience I had was as a 9-year-old. I went to the centenary test at the MCG. And I was there on day 2 when Dennis Lilly and Max Walker ran through the English. We'd been bowled out for 120 odd on the first day, and I think we knocked them over for 95 on the second day, and that was the day I saw. So it was a great day of cricket, but it was just an incredible celebration of the game. Everybody who'd played an Ashes Test match who was alive. They tried to get there, and so the place was crawling with former Test cricketers. And I, with my godmother and my father and I, we managed to collect signatures on the back. Do you remember a first day cover, like with stamps? So we bought a first day cover, this envelope, and we thought, because they'd put out an edition of stamps for the Centenary Test, and I was thinking that would be a great thing to get signed. Well, on the back of that, and I didn't appreciate it at the time, and it's another story, but that envelope got lost about 2 weeks after the Centenary Test, and it wasn't until probably 40 years later, literally, that my dad found it in the back of a drawer while he was cleaning out, and we both looked at this envelope in amazement, because on it were the signatures of Bradman, Keith Miller, Ray Lindwall, I think Gordon Brown, not Gordon Brown, Gordon, anyway, a number of English captains. Gordon Brown's Prime Minister, a number of English captains. It was just this incredible thing. And that envelope is now framed in my office in Canberra. But 3 years after that, I then went to the Centenary Test. I was in England with my parents, and we went to the Centenary Test at Lord's. It's the first time I went and saw the home of cricket, which is just, well, that's a, semi-religious experience, really, to be sitting there, seeing the weather vane of Old Father Time, there, and I think Kim Hughes got a century in that game. Ends up being a draw, that Centenary Test, but just to kind of see both those matches in probably the two most famous cricket grounds in the world is a very fond memory, and speaks to my love of that game.
My dad took my two oldest brothers to the Centenary Test at the MCG as well. That you've witnessed, I think, arguably one of the greatest Test matches of all time. Yeah.
And people will, it's well, talking about kind of religious experiences. I mean, if you, it might be proof of a divine being that the score at the end of the Centenary Test, and how the epic of a 5-day Test match, and how rare a draw is, a tie rather is. That it is precisely the same result as it was 100 years earlier in that Centenary Test. But everything happened, Randall's century, McCosker getting hit and then coming out in the second innings. Lily, I think it's 10 for in the match, but I think he's 6 for in that first innings. It was fantastic.
And the old MCG as well, the old Southern Stand, which had an outer. And my stories that my brother told me about that you would go to the game and you would take one of those polystyrene eskies that would be full of the beer in that, and you would stand on that polystyrene esky so you could see better. But of course, as you take beers out of it and drink it throughout the day, it's less structurally sound for a full-grown person to stand on top of it, and eventually it would shatter. And so when you're leaving the stadium in the day, it's like the last scene from the Battle of the Zulu. Like, it's just the ground is crushed cans and crushed polystyrene former eskies, and some dead bodies lying around as well because they've clearly passed out in the heat of the Australian sun.
Totally. Although going back to the 70s, which is when we're talking about then, cans of beer were made of a stronger tin,
it was steel.
And so you needed, I think they were steel. And so you needed 6 of them as a 9 or a 10-year-old to be able to form a platform for yourself, which you'd line up at the footy. You'd be sort of searching for USB cans, like really scaly exercise when you think about it, but you would accumulate them, and that would give you a little platform, which meant that you got, as a kid, you got a slightly better vantage point.
Yeah, brilliant, very good. I regret, it's one of my regrets. I wish I was at that game. I wish I was old enough to be at that game. I think I was 3, so it clearly wasn't. Anyway, very good. I'm impressed by that. Okay, number two. And it takes us to October 30, 2013. That's one of my worst Boston accents I've ever done in my life. It is an election year. And earlier that year, I had been in Boston with a colleague of ours that now works for the Premier, Daniel Andrews, and we went over there on a fact-finding mission to meet with a whole bunch of people from the Obama campaign to work out how we were going to build a campaign to try and hopefully get Daniel elected in 2014. And we were in Boston for a couple of days meeting with some folks there. And it was a couple of days before the Boston Marathon. Or not a couple of days, so probably about 2 weeks before the Boston Marathon. And then we've come home and those meetings basically were the genesis of the Community Action Network and sort of launching that in the 2013 federal campaign, which obviously wasn't a great campaign for Labor. But, there was a silver cloud that came out of that. So at the end of that campaign, I was pretty knackered, throwing everything at it, kind of went back to work. And then the Boston Red Sox, who were having an improbable season, because they'd finished last the year before, were looking to make the postseason. They make the postseason. They come up against the Detroit Tigers in the American Championship Series. They managed to beat them, who were the highly fancy team to go through the World Series. They make the World Series. I am driving home. What I was doing, I was going to work during the day and I was watching the games at night. So I was trying not to find out the score throughout the day. And I think it was like game 1 or game 2 of the actual World Series against this St. Louis Cardinals. Sorry, I should say this is the Boston Red Sox versus the St. Louis Cardinals. I'm driving to work and I'm going, this is too risky. I can't go through the day not finding out the score. I'm just going to have to go to Boston to watch them hopefully win the World Series. But I was kind of joking to myself a bit about it. That'd be funny, Stephen, do that. I got to my desk and I basically turned on my computer and I started looking for tickets, flights and accommodation in Boston. Turns out this was possible. So I did it. I booked my tickets. But the problem was the Red Sox were now currently down 2-1 in the series. And game 4, if they lost that, they'd be down 3-1, meaning that the chances, it's best of 7 series, down 3-1. They're 1 game away from an elimination. And I've now just bought tickets, flights and accommodation to something that may not happen. So they needed to win game 4 to make it sure that it at least goes to game 6 back in Boston. They win game 4, 4 runs to 2. And I get on a flight and I head to Boston. Now, that year, the Boston Marathon is, that's the year of the bombing.
Yeah, that's right.
And partly, I think, history is now going to show that I think part of the reason why the Red Sox did so well is that they think that moment in the impact on that city, the impact it had on that city and the impact it had on that team kind of galvanized them in a way. Fenway Park, the marathon runs past Fenway Park. The marathon happens on Marathon Monday or Patriots Day in April, which is coming up next week. The Red Sox play early so people can leave the stadium and then go watch the finish of the marathon. The marathon's a huge event in Boston. So for this to happen and for people to die and these bomb blasts go off, it kind of really impacted the city in a way that I think some people probably don't understand from outside the city. But I got a sense of it when we were there because it's just sort of, if you haven't visited the city a lot, you develop friendships with people and you get a sense of what was going through the minds of the people in New England in that year. So to make the World Series, kind of, it felt like this was our year. This was meant to happen, and so to be there for that experience in itself was pretty cool. And I caught up with some friends of mine at a pub before the game. So I landed like the day before. So once again, jet lagged for a bloody sporting event overseas, and went to the stadium. Fenway Park, it's if anyone's ever been there, it's the oldest major league ballpark in the US. They really haven't changed too much of it. I had a seat way out in the bleachers, pretty working class kind of crowd in there. 7:30 start, friggin' freezing cold because it's now late October. I'm rugged up to the max, but the noise, you get warmth from the people in that stadium. And my most memorable moment from that game is the bottom of the third innings, 2 outs, bases loaded, scores are currently 0 each, no runs yet, and Shane Victorino for the Red Sox steps up and hits this looping ball that doesn't just quite get over the green monster, hits the wall, he drives in 3 runs, Sox ahead, and just the stadium just comes alive.
It's been unbelievable.
And from that moment on, it was, I mean, they ended up winning the game quite easily, but it was just a great experience. And I was in Boston for the next sort of 2 weeks, and they have the big duck boat parade where the teams go through the city. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience, and great to sort of share that with the people of Boston. And having been a Red Sox fan, it was just, it was my second greatest sporting highlight I've ever had.
So have you always been a Red Sox fan?
I came to them late in life, to be fair. My American sports journey began with the Boston Celtics, and that's only because of my football team being Celtic.
Yeah.
And basketball in the early 80s took off, in the mid to late 80s took off, and everyone was going for Michael Jordan and the Bulls, and I picked a team, and I went, well, I'm not doing that. I'm going to go for the Boston Celtics. My sister-in-law was also American. She brought me back a Letterman starter jacket for the Boston Celtics, which I still have, and it still fits me. So that was, I followed the Celtics all through my, teenage years, and it was only later that I jumped onto the Red Sox when I was reading the Boston Globe and reading about this other baseball team and their storied history and lovable losers and all that kind of stuff, and I kind of fell in love with the Red Sox, and that kind of led me onto a journey.
Okay, so I'm going to America as well with my number 2, but just I had a first playoff game in the 2011-12 NBA season, which Miami Heat win, and LeBron is playing for Miami Heat. I actually went and saw the first of those games, which I think was, I feel like it was the Knicks versus the Miami Heat, but it was at the American Airlines Stadium in Miami. So that was great, but that's not it. And then my other one was I went to the Oakland Coliseum in 2003 and saw the first of the playoff games there in the baseball for the Oakland Athletics, and that is the Moneyball year. You know the movie,
yeah.
Moneyball?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I had no idea what I was looking at, but I was looking at the Moneyball team. So that was pretty cool. Anyway, my number 2 is neither of those. My number 2 is, and it's again collective. I have had the great luck, really, of going to the US Masters twice, and we are the US Masters is on as we speak, so I went in 2008 when Trevor Immelman won, and I went again in 2014 when Bubba Watson won for his second time. I'm a massive golf nut, and I've seen, we could do a whole podcast on golf that I have watched. I suppose 2008. I'm a huge Tiger Woods fan. I think. There's a podcast about sporting magic we have seen as sports fans. There are 3 people, but one of them, for me, in my time, I won't go into them all now, but one of them is Tiger. And I remember my father, when he, used to tell me that he had seen Bradman score a century, which he did in, I think, the 46-47 series after the war. And it's often stuck with me. Imagine having actually seen Bradman. For me, the contemporary version of that is Tiger. I wanted to see Tiger. And so for the 4 days of that Masters tournament, I saw every hole that Tiger played. Tiger came second. He turned out he was playing on a bung knee, which we didn't know at that point, but played out very famously in the 2008 US Open a couple of months later. But he did have an injured. Well, that same knee was injured at that event. But to follow the great man around, to be able to tell grandkids, I hope I have one day, that I saw him play. I actually saw Tiger Woods play, and I saw him play at the Masters, and I saw him come second. Is a massive highlight for me. And then just Augusta. I mean, it's the closest thing to that tournament. Is the closest thing to perfection I've seen. Like you go to a lot of things and you think, how could you make it better? There is nothing you could do to make that. That tournament is is so beautifully presented. The course is so beautifully presented. I mean, everything is a work of art. Like the way they mow the lawns is a work of art. I was there on the day before, so the last of the practice days, and you would see people with nail clippers cutting the grass around the edge of the sprinkler heads so that it is all completely perfect. When they mow the lawns first thing in the morning, and I've seen footage of this, but I actually saw it in real life. They don't have one mower going back and forth. They mow it against the sort of they create a grain in the fairway which goes against the run of the ball so that the balls don't go as far. But to do that, they literally have about 5 mowers all in this kind of alignment, literally going down the fairway in one hit, and then behind them an army of people with these large bamboo sticks which are sweeping the ground, which is this sort of odd thing, but when you realize what they're doing, they're breaking up any clumps of grass that fall off the mowers so that there is not even a clump of grass there. You could set this thing to music. It is so fantastic to watch, and it's completely so to be there. And I remember, first day, to me, the 13th green at Augusta, which for golf fans, it's very iconic there. It's kind of encircled by these bunkers, which kind of face the wrong way, so you can see the bunkers as part of the picture of the green. And then there's a tributary of Rays Creek, which goes right in front of the green, and it is like, it's just beautiful. And so I get onto the course. I literally run, and you're not allowed to run. Like if you get run, you get thrown off the course. So I'm power walking as fast as I can down there. It's just me, and there's no one else there. And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm thinking, it is just possible that the plane crashed in the middle of the Pacific, and I am now in heaven, because it was, fantastic. And those cherished moments, both of them, to have seen the US Masters.
2 questions. The first one, why in particular did you choose those years? Or was it just because you could get away to it, or was there something?
That was just the opportunity, yeah.
Second question, is Tiger Woods the greatest golfer that has ever lived?
So that's a long question as well. There's I think there are, 3 great golf careers is probably what you have to say. Arguably there's a 4th, but the 3 are Bobby Jones, Jack Nicklaus, and Tiger Woods. And you can, if there's a 4th, it's Harry Vardon, but we're going back into early history there. In terms of those 3, you can make an argument. You can make an argument for any of them. I suppose Jack has the best stats, or he's won the most majors, so that's probably who wins the argument at the end of the day. But you can certainly make an argument for Tiger. I mean, the fields are much more competitive now than they were then. In a way, you can do a measurement, which is, Jack wins 18. His next best is somebody like Gary Player, who wins 9 over that period. So he's kind of won twice as many as number 2. Well, over the period that Tiger has played golf, he's won 15. The next best is 5. He's kind of 3 times better than number 2. So I think that says something about the level of competitiveness of the majors now compared to then. And so I think probably winning 15 now is a bigger deal than winning 18 in the time of Jack, but that's hard to compare. And then you do look at Bobby Jones, who was an amateur, who never turned pro, who was consistently beating the pros, who in 1930 wins the 4 main tournaments, which was the US Amateur, US Open, British Amateur, British Open. He set out to do it, and he did it. Completely unbelievable. And then retires. I think at the ripe old age of 28, 29. And if you sort of look at, I mean, in those days, the US Amateur was clearly a major tournament in the way that it's not now. So if you kind of trying to do your best in equating what were the main tournaments then relative to now, really there are 3 great, like Jones wins 14, Tiger's 15, Jack's 18, and then next best is sort of probably 9, something like that, depending on how you measure it. So I think that's where I get to in my head. There are 3 great careers, and he's one of them. And I got to see him. And I saw him in Australia. I've seen him a few times. I saw him when he came out and played the last President's Cup at the end of 2019. Hope to see him again. But that year in 2008, he'd started that year winning like 7 straight tournaments. Well, I thought he was going to win the Masters. And we didn't know he was injured. So it was at the peak of his powers, albeit I guess we were seeing somebody who was carrying injury, but just fantastic. And the crowd around him, fantastic. And he makes a putt on the final day on the 11th green, which just gives him a sniff. Like at that moment, there's just maybe he can do it. And the roar, which is at Amen Corner for people who know the course, so it's where the biggest crowd is. The roar was something else. So I've heard a tiger roar in the heart of the US. So that's definitely one to count.
The way that you talked about the Augusta course before, horticulturalists would be just weeping with joy. Your description of that grass there.
It's amazing, and it's I mean you can't go into it. It's the only economy in any form I've ever come across where that club has endless money. Like it has more money than it can spend. I mean, it's Augusta National at the end of the day is a golf club which maintains one 18-hole course and a 9-hole par 3 course. That's what it's there to do. And yet the TV rights alone for the Masters are, I don't know, hundreds of millions, I suspect. And so the amount of money they have to spend on those 18 holes is unlike anything else. So underneath the entire course is this suction system. There was a moment where it was raining. There was a 45-minute rain delay. Some puddles had formed, and then there's this noise like you're at an airport and a plane's about to take off. And it's this suction system under the and puddles just disappear, just sucks them out of the ground like immediately. There are heating coils under every green. They talk about, how is it that the azaleas always flower for the Masters? Well, the answer to that is because there's heating lamps on every one of them on the weekend beforehand. Like it is just, and if you knew nothing about golf and you just wanted to see one of the most extraordinary botanical gardens in the world, you would go to Augusta National, and every hole is named after a flower, and along the hole you see that particular flower showcased. It's like my mum, wouldn't really be that excited about the golf, but would love seeing a beautiful garden, would love Augusta National. It's I could go on forever. So number one. Okay,
number one for me in my all-time top 5 sporting events that I've attended. Now I know a lot of my cousins in Scotland and the diaspora are listening to this episode, and I think they know what I'm going to mention when all I need to say is one word, which is Seville. For those who are not aware of what that means, it takes us back to 2003, and it's the UEFA Cup final. So we're talking about association football again. And Celtic make their very first European final since they lost to Ajax in the European Cup in 1970, which is now the Champions League. But they had this remarkable run in a knockout tournament to get all the way to the final, which was held in the southern Spanish capital in Andalusia, in the town of Seville or Sevilla, and they came up against the Portuguese champions of Porto. I actually had been in Scotland a month earlier for my long vacation, and I came home and went back to my day job, and then Celtic won the semi-final against another Portuguese team, Boa Vista, and I didn't think we'd get that far. And the next day, I sort of was at work and I was just sort of tapping away and looking at, what's the chances of getting, tickets or anything to go to this final, but thinking that's not going to happen. One, I had no more money because I just spent all my money on this bloody trip. And then my oldest brother calls me up and says, "Do you want to go to Seville?" And I went, "I knew you were going to do that. And I'm really annoyed you've done that because now it's definitely in my head." And on that weekend, a friend of mine who works for the Commonwealth Bank and is our goalkeeper in our soccer team, at halftime I sort of nestled up beside him and said, "Sean, how quickly can I get a bank loan?" And he went, "I knew you were going to ask me that. You're going to go to Seville. You're going to go to Seville, aren't you?" And I said, "I'm thinking about it. I'm just trying to work it out." So The challenge was here, it wasn't actually easy to get a ticket to the game. The stadium only holds 55,000 and everyone wants to get a ticket for this match in terms of the Celtic support, not just in Scotland, but around the world. Accommodation was hard to come by. There's not actually a lot of hotels in Seville. We end up staying in a town called Cadiz, which is about 100k south on the coast. Anyone is ever going to go visit Spain, please go to Cadiz. It is a beautiful little town on the is it on the Mediterranean or is it actually in the?
No, I don't think. I think it's on the Atlantic.
Yeah, it is on the Atlantic.
Yep, and they make warships there.
There you go. So we end up getting accommodation there. The match ticket, we got that through like one of those sort of Amex. We knew someone who had an Amex Platinum card and they had that concierge service, and they can get you tickets for whatever, but they charge a roaring bull. And I'm not going to tell you how much I paid for that ticket, but it was insanely stupid. But we managed to get our tickets. The hardest thing was to get flights. Now, getting from Melbourne to Europe was fine, but getting to Seville was nearly impossible. And we're on the phone to the travel agent, also showing our age because who does that anymore? And the travel agent saying, Stephen, I'm sorry, but I just can't get you a flight into Seville. This is not even peak season. I don't understand it. Every flight is literally booked up. Like this is physically impossible to get you into the flight on these days that you want to. Cut a long story short, we finally get some weird route flight from Heathrow to Charles de Gaulle, had to get a bus to Orly, then a flight to Madrid, and then it connected to Seville, got in there. Anyway, we arrive in Seville. Remember, the stadium only holds 55,000. There's only been about 10,000 tickets allocated to the Celtic support. There are 95,000 Celtic supporters in Seville for the 3 days leading up to the game. When we got to Melbourne Airport, we were in the queue to check in with about 30 other Celtic supporters. When we got to Singapore, about another 40 Celtic supporters got on the flight. By the time we got to Heathrow, the airport was just a wash of green and white. They'd predicted that in the 3 days leading up to the game, 4% of international flights were booked by Celtic supporters.
Wow.
And when we arrived there, the city was just awash with, thousands and thousands of Celtic supporters, and not just from Scotland and Ireland. I'm talking, the city square. If you've been to Seville, there's this beautiful Catholic cathedral in the main square, and that's kind of where everyone hung out. And there was all the supporters' flags from New York and Boston and Baltimore and Buenos Aires, Tokyo, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, Hong Kong, the Middle East, all through Europe. It was incredible. And it was just it was a pilgrimage, and it was a festival for 3 days leading up to the game. One of the ways to sort of summarize it and how the support just kind of immersed itself into this city and just fell in love with it. The locals fell in love with us. There was a school group being led on a school excursion to go to the cathedral. They're probably 10-year-old kids in their school uniforms, all walking through this throng of hundreds of thousands of Celtic supporters, being led by the school teacher waving a little yellow flag like they do in the museums, right? And they're all holding hands and walking single file through this, thousands of drunken Celtic supporters all singing and carrying on. And everyone sort of got out of the way and made a guard of honor to let them walk through. And they're terrified. They're looking around up at all of these people in kilts and frigging the whole thing, right? And they walk through, and everyone's singing songs at them and all that kind of stuff and whatever. An hour later, that same school group comes back, but this time they're not in their school uniform, or they are still in their school uniforms, but on top of them they're wearing Celtic jerseys and scarves and flags. They are completely decked out in Celtic kit. The teacher's not flying that little yellow flag anymore. She has a massive Irish tricolour that she's waving as she walks through the crowd. And everyone sees this, and the place just erupts. And everyone starts singing to these kids. And they're now converted. They are absolute full-on Celtic supporters. Can't speak a word of English. And it was like that for the whole trip. And everywhere you went, people, the locals completely looked after us. The stadium is actually a bit of a walk out of town. Probably, I don't know, like further than the MCG, like triple the distance from the city. And it was a really, really hot day. It was a night game. I remember sort of with my brother and I, we sort of bar hopped all our way out to the stadium and dropped into little tapas bars and had a couple of drinks and some tapas and that kind of stuff and made our way out to the stadium. And just even that walk was just amazing because you weren't walking, there was thousands of people walking there. But we're all kind of wondering, well, if they only allocated 10,000 tickets to supporters, and the stadium holds 55,000, because normally what it's going to be like sort of, 10,000 Porto fans, 10,000 Celtic fans, and the rest is kind of like, wealthy UEFA executives and all that kind of stuff, like a normal grand final in an AFL sense. When we walked in there, there was the Porto end, which had their 10,000 allocation, and then the rest of the stadium was a sea of green and white. It was basically a home game. And the atmosphere inside that stadium was just remarkable for the entire game.
And the result?
We lost in extra time 3-2.
Oh.
We came from behind twice. Henrik Larsson, who is a modern-day Tiger Woods for the Celtic supporter, Swedish guy, scored 2 cracking headers for us, but we just ran out of juice. We had a player sent off in extra time, and Porto, which in the end, which is a better team. They were then coached by Jose Mourinho, who then the next season went on to that team went on to win the European Cup. They were a really good side. And I remember just being absolutely devastated by the result. Funnily enough, a guy sitting next to us was from Frankston.
Wow.
And Billy Connolly was kind of like 10 rows behind us, and Rod Stewart, and all this sort of stuff. The game was amazing. The atmosphere was incredible. The singing was amazing. I almost passed out in the second goal, and I just I sung my heart out, just to get this team over the line. But walking out of the stadium, and we sort of went back into town. I remember sort of sitting on a side curb out the front of a bar, just having a drink with my brother. The city was quiet. Like, there was still 85,000 fans everywhere, but they were quiet, and I think they were kind of just reflecting on what they just experienced, not just in terms of the game, but the last 3 days. And we were disappointed that we didn't win, but we realised that we'd been a part of something incredibly special. And there was an article in the Glasgow Herald the next day by a very well-respected Scottish journalist who said, last night, Celtic proved that they are more than a sporting team, but they are a social and cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
And it's true. It really is.
Yeah.
And for that moment there, it kind of crystallised why I stupidly follow this football team around the world.
Yeah.
And my cousins and my nephews and nieces and that, they've all said, I wish I was old enough to go to Seville. I want us to get that chance again. And I don't know, the way that European football works now, it's so much stacked against sort of teams like Celtic, to sort of, the way that money operates in European football now, it's, the Liverpools and Manchesters and the Italians and the Spanish teams that are always going to dominate and make European finals. But for that brief moment, we kind of broke that mold and just had an experience that, and it's my number one moment, yet we didn't win.
Even though you lost. Yeah.
And a friend of yours and I, Tom Cargill, called me up after the Red Sox won the World Series. He called me when I was in Boston. He said, Stephen, does this make it number one? And I said, you know what? No, it just doesn't.
But my number one really is the same idea. There's certain sport which, I put golf and cricket in this category where, you marvel at the game. But then there are some things which are tribal. And it's what the Glasgow Herald journalist was saying. There's a social and cultural dimension to it, which is much bigger than the sport. And I think football in Europe is obviously that. Aussie rules for us, I think, is the closest we get to that, and for me, that's the Geelong Football Club, and that's what my collective number one is obviously the Cats winning those 3 flags in 2007, 9, 11. But I can remember in 2007, it was the games in September. We there's an election in November, so we're 2 months out, and I'm door knocking during that week. And around Geelong, and in grand final week 2007, when it really did, and we hadn't won a premiership for 44 years, so it really did look like maybe something extraordinary was going to happen. I reckon 2 out of every 3 houses in Geelong had something in their window which identified with the football club, and there is no other cultural or social phenomenon in Geelong which unifies people remotely in the same way as what the footy club does in when it's going well. And you realise that this isn't just sport. This is something else. This is and it is, and the following of it. Sometimes I think I put so much. You meet the players. A whole lot of them are kids. you think. Do they have any idea the extent to which I'm emotionally invested in what they do? Like, you know, and they don't is the answer to that question. But they really are the custodians of our emotions. But I think that's part of it. You know, like you submit yourself to something over which you have no control, which is therefore by definition bigger than yourself. But you are there to be part of whatever that narrative is, and what it is the community to which you belong. And for me, that's where I live, and it's something which is wonderful about Sporting Geelong. But the story you've just told, that's a global community of Celtic fans around the world who came together in that moment. And I can absolutely get what it was for you to be there. And for us to win in 2007, you know, each of those three premierships have their own different character for me. But you know, probably the most, in some ways, the most sort of collectively memorable is the 2007, because it's the drought breaker, and Geelong just goes nuts, and it really does change the town. Like, it really, Sleepy Hollow, which is how Geelong's been described, it died on that night. No one called it Sleepy Hollow after that. You know, I like to think what Geelong's about now is a kind of a humble excellence. You know, that's we don't overstate ourselves, but we're good at lots of things. You know, and not just footy. You know, things at Deakin Uni. There are some really fantastic companies that come out of Geelong. Costas as an example. Humble excellence, but it starts with the footy club, and it's really about the way in which that club spoke for an entire community and gave it a completely different sense of itself. It was a remarkable experience about the importance of sport within our culture, and the power of it to produce joy and to make life just so much better for, you know, a whole lot of people for whom this is what, you know, there's not necessarily a lot else there. But this is a really central thing. I think the other, if I think about those three, probably 2011 was the most satisfying. It was the one we didn't expect, and it was just a real vindication of the quality of the organisation. And I think personally for Chris Scott, who is one of the best, maybe the best people management exercise I'd ever seen, coming into the club at the end of 2010 and being able, you know, and it was pretty distraught with the loss of Bomber as the coach, and then the loss of Gary Ablett, but to sort of pull them together and win was incredible. But perhaps if I was to go to a moment, it is 2009, which is the close one, and that's we win in the last few seconds of the game, really, where there's a toe poke in the centre of the ground. Matthew Scarlett and Paul Chapman ends up snapping a goal. He gets on the other end of that chain of play, and it puts us up, and then we know we're going to win at that moment. And for me, you know, I had, I wanted family to be with me. Like, I wanted to share these moments with people close to me, because that's kind of what sport's about. And on one side of me was my father, who I had been, you know, growing up. I went to my first game with my dad. I went to all the games at Kidney Park with my dad. You know, he was elderly at that point. He's since left us, but he you know, he's passed. But you know, it was to share that moment with him was wonderful. On the other side of me was my son. So there are three generations of us, and he would have been 13 in 2009. Yeah, he would have been 13. Again, it just sort of, like, I had taken him to a whole lot of games. There'd been a lot of heartache for him in the early days when we weren't winning. And, you know, to be able to share that with my son on one side of me, my father on the other, three generations, completely connected by the following of this game, was, you know, really one of the most special moments in my life. Like, it really is one of the most special moments in my life, because it's not just about sport at that moment. It's absolutely about family, and the sense of connection, and shared joy that came at a very personal level in that moment. Really, I mean, people laugh at this, but I kind of, as we're doing our top 5, when I look at the top 10 moments in my life, my marriage, the birth of my kids are obviously the most important moments, but not far off them. It's in the kind of next category are those 3 premierships, unquestionably, because it's deep inside you, but it's not a shallow thing. It's about an investment of emotion over a lifetime, but it's also ultimately about family as well. It's about a connection with your immediate family and a connection with a broader family that you are a part of, and that you can speak a language with, even if you've never met the people in that family before, just as you did in Seville with those Celtic fans. I think at the very height of what it is to be a human being, that it's right there. Like, it's really right there. I can't wait for that day to happen again for all of those bigger reasons. I don't know when. I hope it's going to happen this September. But it's it was very, very special.
I'm really glad we've done this.
Yeah, me too. It's been a lot of fun. It doesn't feel like work at all.
No.
Not work. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And I just listening to you then talk about that, I wonder if, it's you need to go through 89 and 92 and 94 and 95, those moments to make 07 or 09 or 11 so much more. It comes into, you have to have that. You got to have pain
totally
to have, to find that hope and then have that success.
Oh, totally. I mean, after 1995, I wrote a piece for the Herald Sun where I sort of equated us to Collingwood, because Collingwood went through that period in the 70s, and really, the boom industry in Geelong after 1995 was psychiatry. I mean, we were all a very traumatized group of people, but no question that the pain of those years was put to bed in that moment. But also, you realise I talked about that Jamie Button article, and he talked about, in that article, he spoke about his own family, and you realise it's a really significant thing. It's not just it is a group of young guys chasing pigskin in a pursuit which doesn't necessarily look productive, but it's so much more than that. I really remember, like, in terms of following Geelong, I'm at Melbourne Uni. This is late 80s, and I'm kind of thinking I'm in the Labor Club, and I'm kind of a bit avant-garde, and when I absolutely wasn't, but I kind of had in my head that maybe I was, and that maybe I'm kind of I'm beyond sport. I've evolved as a person, and then I'm at home, and it's the footy replay, which isn't quite the same thing nowadays as it was then. And they're replaying a quarter of a Geelong game, and I was just watching it, and without even knowing it, I was watching it, and I was kind of transfixed, and I couldn't leave. And we weren't that good that year, and I'm not even sure we won that game. I just couldn't turn my eyes off it. And it suddenly occurred to me, I actually love this club. Like, I really love them. I love the hoops. I love watching it. And it's not even up to me. Like, this is actually who I am.
Yeah.
I couldn't choose not to do this. Yeah. This is just what I'm about. So embrace it. I clearly have.
I feel like this is becoming a audio version of Nick Hornby's fever pitch book, tracking his obsession with Arsenal in the year that they won the league in '89. Richard Marles, this has been wonderful to have you on the show today. I'm really glad that we did do this. Thank you for sharing all of the memories that you've had across. Your list was way more diverse than mine. Props to you for doing that. But this was great. I'm glad we did this.
Me too. And next time, Stephen, we'll get back into mainstream politics, but this is much more fun.
I know. I feel sorry for a lot of our dedicated, loyal listeners, looking for some update sort of conversations about how the Morrison government had one job. You had one job, and you've stuffed up the vaccine rollout. But maybe we can touch base on that next time, and many other things as well.
We'll do that next time.
Cheers.
Beautiful. See you later.